It's been a while since I reviewed a Wii game, and I wanted to give my Wii U a bit of love, so I popped in a game that I haven't spent a lot of time with, Madworld. It's a game published by Sega and developed by Platinum Games, so you know it's going to be heavy on the quirkiness and action. Keep in mind that this game may be a bit gory for you, so if you get queasy by seeing a lot of blood, or get offended easily by harmful language, then this game will most definitely not be for you. Madworld takes place in a city that was taken over by a bunch of madmen that are killing in the name of a game show known as the Death Watch Games. Your character Jack enters the city 3 days into the competition, and from the start, it's hinted that although he joins the games proper, he's working for some agency for some ulterior motives. You'll find out a few stages in that the games began with a biological virus was spread throughout the city, and the cure would be handed out to anyone who went and killed another human being. Of course, this created some crazy chaos, and now the island is occupied by a bunch of frantic murderers. Jack's goal is to fight his way up the ranks to be number 1, along with accomplishing whatever other mission he was given. The game is a bloody action game, in which Jack gets put in an arena and is tasked with getting a certain amount of points. Once that happens, he'll be able to fight against the boss of the area. Killing this boss gives you access to the next level. The map is divided into 5 areas of 3 zones, and the third level of each area is a simple boss battle. There aren't any firearms in the game, at least none that I've ever seen, so you're stuck with your fists to dish out hurt to the thugs. The controls are fairly simple, and unfortunately due to it being on the Wii, there are plenty of motion controls required. Pressing A punches, C moves the camera to straight ahead of Jack and holding it locks onto an enemy, and Z jumps. B is the fun button, as it brings out Jack's wrist-mounted chainsaw. Yes, chainsaw. See, Jack needs to dole out as much punishment as possible to rack up points. Punching enemies alone won't do enough, so you want to use other weapons to be as brutal as possible. The chainsaw is often used as an instant kill attack, and in order to use it you need to swing the Wiimote horizontally or vertically to swing in the appropriate direction. There are other weapons that are given out as bonuses for hitting certain point thresholds, such as daggers, spiked bats, and even a spear. Some objects in the stage can also be picked up and used, such as tires and signposts that get impaled through the enemy's head. But that's not all. One of the best techniques you can use is grabbing hold of your enemies by holding down A. You can then swing the nunchuck to headbutt the enemy to stun them so they won't be able to escape your grasp. You can then swing the Wiimote either horizontally or vertically to throw the enemy, preferably into some sort of environmental hazard. See, you can probably notice that there are many harmful objects littering the stages. You can throw the enemies into these hazards, which then gets not only a kill, but a lot more points. If you can manage to somehow lure multiple thugs into a trap, you'll get even more points. Your score is good since they ultimately allow you to finish the stage by killing the boss. Madworld is incredibly bloody, if you can't tell. So let's get right to the graphical style of the game. It has a heavy comic book feel, with only 4 colors typically seen: black, white, red, and the occasional yellow. The entire game is presented in the black and white scheme, with red blood being used just as freely. Killing your enemies, especially if it was done by a world hazard or weapon, spills blood everywhere. The blood splatter doesn't always disappear, so it's definitely possible to paint the world red. That happens even more when the bloodbath challenges are introduced. In almost every stage after a certain amount of points are accumulated, you can get to a specific point of the level to start a special minigame. In these games, you're given a simple objective and get a very limited time to complete the objective. If you don't do well, it's only points you're losing out on. These are usually fairly fun to do, whether it's throwing multiple people into a massive jet turbine, having a massive Frankenstein monster hand smashing zombies, or injecting soda into thugs so that they are floaty enough to get flung into some fairly provocative cardboard women. These are simple diversions to the normal gameplay and help to keep things from becoming too mundane. And that's the thing with Madworld. Once you get beyond the initial shock value, you'll find that the majority of the gameplay is a simple beat up enemy, throw them into objects, and waggle the controller 1,000 times. Other than the simple punch combos by pressing A, everything else is done with motion controls. It gets old after a few levels. But each stage, other than the few vehicle levels, end up being the same. The bosses are the one thing that makes the game change up a bit, but even these can be slightly frustrating due to one flaw. It's very hard to evade enemy attacks. The only defensive option you have is to use the nunchuck to backflip. That's it. At times, you may be able to use the chainsaw to perform what's called a power struggle, in which you waggle both controllers, and if you win, you do massive damage to the enemy. These power struggles are often done with bosses, and are pretty instrumental in beating them. The other big quirk is the combat, or really the controls in general. They just feel stiff. There were times I attempted to swipe to attack and almost threw the controller because I had to swipe horizontally or vertically a few times. Add in my cat constantly swiping at the controller, and you can probably imagine the difficulty of playing the game. Then again, I feel like playing any game on the Wii with a cat is a challenge in itself. Even with these complaints, there are still some fun things to the game that keep you going. Since the game has that game show vibe, there are some commentators that are just plain hilarious. They are constantly badgering each other, and they usually have some interesting things to talk about. It's just a shame that their lines are repeated in stages, and there are no subtitles for them. My hearing sucks nowadays because of this getting old thing, so it would be nice to have the subtitles on to be able to hear what they're actually spouting. The music of the game is mostly all rapish in design, so it doesn't really click with me. I would have preferred some good metal music, but the stuff that plays does fit. I just ended up turning it down a bit so I could hear the announcers. And that's Madworld on the Wii. It's not a bad game, but it does start to overstay its welcome after a few stages in. Once you play a few levels, you'll have played them all. Bosses and bloodbath challenges are enough to keep the game somewhat fresh, but the fighting to get there feels repetitive after maybe 6 or 7 levels. The motion control could have been left on the table, but, and again, it is the Wii. I personally enjoy seeing a sequel to this, since I did enjoy the story and the overall gameplay. A sequel should avoid the motion control, though. I'd be fine with standard controls. And a side note, where's Jack in the Mortal Kombat series? Madworld feels like a mix between Comic Zone and Mortal Kombat with all the blood and gore. It's a natural fit. Might Jack be a DLC character for Mortal Kombat 11? Here's hoping. Final score? 5 out of 7. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.